the wand that betrayed. Harry Potter had always known a life of hardship, but through every trial, every battle, every dark moment, he had always believed in one thing: the power of love, the power of friendship, and the magic that connected him to those he cared about. His greatest dream, the one that had sustained him through endless battles with darkness, was simple: a life of peace, free from the burden of war, where he could watch his children grow, surrounded by the friends who had been with him since the beginning. But dreams are fragile things, easily twisted. It had been years since the defeat of Voldemort, years since Harry had last felt the weight of destiny bearing down on him. He had married Ginny, raised a family, and watched as his children set off for Hogwarts, just as he had all those years ago. Yet, deep in the recesses of his mind, something stirred. A shadow, a doubt. The Elder Wand, the wand that had once been his, whispered in the depths of his memory, a reminder of a power he had willingly given up. Harry had thought he was done with the wand's allure, with the endless hunger for power it represented. But in the quiet moments, when the house was silent and the world seemed too still, he would find himself thinking of it. The wand, buried with Dumbledore, had never truly left him. He could feel its pull, like a cord tethered to his very soul. One evening, after Ginny had gone to bed and the house was dark, Harry stood by the window, staring into the blackness beyond. A cold wind swept through the house, though none of the windows were open. It sent a chill down his spine, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something was wrong. He reached for his wand, his old, faithful wand, but it felt unfamiliar in his hand. The grip was off, the weight wrong. He cast a small Lumos charm, but the light it emitted was weak, barely illuminating the space around him. Frowning, Harry turned to leave the room, but a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Harry." It was soft, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who's there?" he called, his voice betraying the fear he hadn't felt in years. There was no reply, only the sound of the wind howling outside. But then, slowly, something began to materialize in the darkness. A shape, faint at first, but growing more defined with each passing second. Harry's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. The Elder Wand. It floated in the air before him, its twisted, knotted wood gleaming faintly in the dim light. The wand seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, and Harry could feel its presence in his mind, whispering to him, calling him. The power it offered was intoxicating, but there was something else, a darkness, deeper and more insidious than anything he had ever felt before. "I buried you," Harry whispered, his voice trembling. "You're not supposed to be here." The wand tilted slightly, as though mocking him. And then, with a sudden, violent movement, it flew toward him, embedding itself in his hand. The shock of it made him gasp, and for a moment, Harry's mind was flooded with images, flashes of battles, deaths, and the faces of those he had lost. He saw Dumbledore, Snape, Sirius, and others, figures who had shaped his life but who were long gone. But these weren't just memories, they were twisted, corrupted. In each vision, the Elder Wand was there, watching, waiting, feeding off the death and destruction. Harry tried to let go of the wand, but his fingers wouldn't obey. They clenched tightly around it, as though the wand had fused with his very skin. Panic surged through him. and he tried to cast a spell, anything to break the connection, but the words wouldn't come. His magic felt wrong, twisted by the wand's dark influence. Suddenly, the room around him began to shift. The walls of his home melted away, replaced by the cold, oppressive stone of Hogwarts' Great Hall. He stood alone, surrounded by shadows. In the distance, he could hear faint echoes of laughter, familiar voices, distant yet unmistakable. Ron, Hermione, Ginny. But the laughter quickly turned to screams. The shadows around him began to move, swirling and coalescing into forms. They were people, twisted, broken versions of those he had known. Hermione stepped forward, her face gaunt and pale, her eyes hollow. "You should have let it go, Harry," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. "You should have let us go." One by one, the figures of his friends appeared, each one distorted, their faces marred by pain and suffering. They blamed him. He could see it in their eyes. He had brought them to this. The Elder Wand had never truly been buried. Its curse had lingered, waiting for the moment to claim him, and through him, all those he loved. Harry tried to scream, to shout for help, but his voice was gone. The figures closed in, their hands reaching out, cold and clammy, pulling him down. The ground beneath him gave way, and Harry felt himself falling deeper and deeper into a void of blackness. The only thing he could feel was the Elder Wand, still fused to his hand, pulling him into the abyss. In the darkness, a voice whispered in his ear, soft and malevolent, "You will never be free." The last thing Harry saw before the darkness consumed him entirely was the flicker of green light, the killing curse, aimed not at him, but at the life he had always dreamed of. Peace, love, happiness, all of it snuffed out in an instant. And then there was nothing, only the cold, eternal darkness, and the weight of the wand that had once promised power but delivered only despair.